Great. So welcome here in the classroom, Sue. Great to have you in the class. Thanks for tuning in for our webinar, Rosé Décomposé, where we're going to break down rosé wines, how they're made, where they're made, and why you might like to go out and pick one up and give it a try and see what you think. My name's Malcolm Lamont. I'm a holder of the diploma with the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, as well as a Bachelor of Education, and with the US-based Society of Wine Educators, a certified wine educator. For today's webinar here in the classroom, Sue, and for those tuning in online with the recording, welcome to you as well. We'll talk about where rosé wines are made and how rosé wines are made. So two simple tasks, but we'll see how interesting it can be to produce something as beautiful as these rosé wines here in Côte de Rosés. So don't forget to stop and smell the rosés. So we've seen in the last year, the numbers for rosé wine has really shot up, which is fantastic because for a long time, rosé was sweet or off dry, made with poor quality grapes and things like Métis or White Zinfandel, which we'll talk about a little bit. Not very good quality grapes, not very good quality wines. But then in the 90s, late 90s and 2000s, we've seen a real renaissance from some of the regions we'll talk about here. And the numbers, when I looked at drinks business, rosé's sales were up 40% in the United States in 2019. So still the world's largest market and a significant hike for rosés. So we've seen things like the hashtag rosé all day. And I'm not sure if you've heard or if anybody's heard the term brosé. Kind of came out during in the last couple of years to indicate that guys like this can enjoy a glass of rosé. Excuse me. So how is rosé made? Well, there's three ways you can make a rosé. The most prevalent for this delicate color is called direct press. We'll talk about how that's done. You can also do something called saigner, comes from the French word to bleed, and we'll see why saigner is called to bleed. So you can make a rosé by direct press, you can make a rosé by saigner, and you can make a rosé by assemblage, by blending red and white wines together. So on this little chart here that hopefully you can see on your screen, this is a red wine. So all rosé comes from red grapes. So you can make a red wine from red grapes or a white wine from red grapes because the juice is clear, but you can also make a rosé with the clear juice from the red grapes and just a little bit of skin contact. So in this infographic we see this is kind of the progress of the red grapes going down to become a red wine, and along the way these are the levels that each of the rosé winemaking methods would come out of the red wine. So the first one, the earliest in the process, right when the grapes start to get loaded, red grapes start to get loaded into the press, we'll have a direct press. So just maybe a half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours of skin contact, just a little bit of that red anthocyanin, the red color pigment, leaching into the rosé wine. And then the red skins are pressed off, and that direct press, lightly pink colored, beautiful colored rosé is pressed off and then goes through fermentation and bottled and sold as a light colored rosé. Another method, saigner, is actually, you'll start with a red wine, and so you'll crush the grapes and the red skin color starts to get into the juice. And saigner is made predominantly for concentrating a red wine. So the purpose of a rosé saigner wine is that they're producing a red wine and they want to remove some of the juice from that fermenting red wine to produce a richer, more concentrated, more colorful, deeper red wine. So the byproduct, it would be a saigner rosé wine. A little bit of that pink juice comes off of the red wine that's being made and is bled off, or saigner comes off the red wine tank, and then you have a rosé wine. And then a more concentrated red, and you can actually sell both. So it's a fairly clever tactic that they use for producing a saigner rosé wine. The third method, which perhaps is maybe misunderstood to be the only way or the main way that rosés are wine. Very few wines are made by assemblage, which is a blend of a little bit of red wine with white wine. So they'll actually blend maybe 3 or 5% of a red wine volume, and just that little bit of color adds enough red to give a pink rosé assemblage wine. So assemblage blending, French word for blending, red wine with white wine, and just a little bit of red wine goes into an assemblage. So if those are the methods rosé wines are made in, then where is rosé wine made? Certainly in the south of France. If you think rosé, I think back to the image of the brosé wines, and you know, around Nice and south of Provence, Aix-en-Provence, these beautiful Mediterranean lifestyle type wines. Certainly Provence is best known for its rosé, and rosé is perhaps best known for that direct press light pink colored style from Provence. Just to the west, still along the Mediterranean coast in the south of Rhone, southern Rhone, we have Tavel is a region just across the Rhone River from Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And Tavel is a 100% rosé appellation. So only rosé wines come from this region, this appellation called Tavel in the southern Rhone. And they'll use, Tavel wines tend to be a little bit deeper in color. They'll either have a longer maceration period, soaking on the red skins to get a deeper color. And they also use thicker skinned grapes like Mourvedre and some other southern Rhone grapes. Third region you might find in the south of France would be Languedoc-Roussillon. This is around the, towards the south, south of France. And they use similar grapes as Provence and southern Rhone. And tend to be excellent value. So you can get a rosé made from Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre from the Languedoc-Roussillon for an excellent value. They tend to be dry. All three of these regions produce dry rosé wines, which tend to be more flavorful than their off-dry counterparts. And an excellent value from Languedoc-Roussillon. So this would probably be where I'd suggest when you go pick up your rosé wine from anywhere from this region. So there might be sub appellations like Corbière or Fitou or Minervois, but they tend to be in our market in Canada and Ontario and British Columbia. They're around $15 to $20. So maybe eight or 10 pounds in the UK and Scotland. So highly recommend a good value Languedoc-Roussillon rosé wine. Still in France, Champagne, of course, producing rosé sparkling wines from Pinot Noir, as well as Pinot Meunier, the two red grapes in Champagne, by the same method. So they're allowed to use assemblage in Champagne. It's one of the few quality regions in the world that produces a rosé by quality rosé by blending, assemblage method. And they'll also do direct press method in Champagne as well, depending on the house. Bordeaux to the southwest, around the city of Bordeaux, is producing an interesting wine called Clairette. This is to mimic the initial style of red wine from Bordeaux, which used to be quite pale in color and would now be considered a darker rosé. And this was the original style of Bordeaux before the 19th century, let's say. And they now produce a style called Clairette to mimic that paler colored. It's almost like a dark rosé or a lighter red from the Merlot, Cab Sauv, and Cabernet Franc grapes that they grow in Bordeaux. Other regions in France include Alsace and Bourgogne, Loire Valley like Sancerre, producing rosé mostly from Pinot Noir. So many different grape varieties throughout France for their rosé wines. Spain also is an excellent value and perhaps would be considered one of the top regions most synonymous with rosé and top countries most synonymous with rosé, in particular from Navarra and Rioja in the northern, along the Ebro River Valley, producing some Grenache as well as Tempranillo and other indigenous Spanish grape varieties for the rosé wines. These can be even better value actually than Languedoc-Roussillon, which is just across the Pyrenees Mountains from this area. And these can be awesome value as well. So you can get a decent quality, good or maybe very good even, or at least acceptable or good for less than $15 in Canada, Canadian LCBO price, for example. Italy also is well known for its rosés, or at least has a strong tradition of rosés. Three in particular to highlight include Bardolino in Veneto. This is along Lake Garda, where Valpolicella wines are produced, and they produce a rosé wine from the Valpolicella grapes as well in this area. Very food friendly, very refreshing. I think that's probably where this style of rosé is different from the Mediterranean style, which tend to be riper, bolder, and higher in alcohol and more coarse and viscous. These cooler climate, northern Italian, Sancerre, Alsace, Bourgogne rosés tend to be lighter, crisp, and refreshing, great with food, but not as robust or concentrated as the Mediterranean style. You could almost split it into two camps. Further in Abruzzo is a classic style rosé produced in Italy as well as in Puglia, even further south. This is a very hot climate and very good value because labor and land is quite inexpensive in this region of Italy, and fuller bodied style, fuller, riper rosé, again with good value due to the economic location. In the rest of the world, Canada producing some excellent rosé, mostly in Ontario and British Columbia. California, this is where white Zinfandel was put on the map. White Zinfandel was initially made with the red Zinfandel grape, and this was where it was actually a twist of fate that the red wine didn't ferment all the way, and so it was only lightly colored and still quite sweet from the stuck fermentation. And Sutter was able to sell the Zinfandel wine and became a huge hit in the 80s, and still is well known throughout America and Canada as well as white Zinfandel, as a fairly simple, off-dry, very pleasure-invoking style wine. South America, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, also producing some very exciting, interesting wines, rosé wines, predominantly from Pinot Noir, but different grape varieties throughout the world. So what's the Rosé? It is certainly starting to become pop culture mainstream, widely accepted as a go-to drink. Just like white or red wine might have been in the 80s, that was kind of the understanding. And now rosé is becoming a valid or viable, well-known third option. It's made in 3 different ways, predominantly direct press, also some saignée, and sometimes you'll see assemblage rosé wines made all over the world, especially in France and Europe, like Spain and Italy, around the Mediterranean. But emerging countries producing very interesting wines for the thirsty market for rosé wines. So that's it for Rosé Décomposé. Thank you for attending here in the classroom. I'll stop the recording there. And if you have any questions, it'd be great to open it up and discuss those with you.